She had no option. The dust kicked up by the approaching carriage settled like a shroud over the Finch ranch as Eleonora watched from the porch, her hands gripping the weathered railing until her knuckles turned white. In that carriage sat her future, a future she'd never chosen, negotiated away like cattle at market to save her family's failing ranch. "He's here," her father called from inside, his voice heavy with the weight of necessary sacrifice. Eleonora smoothed her best dress, a faded blue thing that had seen better days, much like everything else on the ranch. The irony wasn't lost on her, dressing up to meet the man who would inherit everything she'd worked to preserve. Kane Sterling. Even his name sounded cold, transactional. She'd heard he was a businessman from back east, probably soft-handed and sharp-suited, seeing their land as nothing more than numbers on a ledger. The carriage door opened, and out stepped a man who defied every expectation she'd harbored. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of outdoor work, Kane Sterling moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His dark hair was slightly tousled from travel, and when he looked up at her, his eyes held an intelligence that seemed to take in everything at once. "Miss Finch," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. "I hope the journey wasn't too presumptuous of me." Presumptuous. Eleonora thought, "You're about to marry a stranger to acquire land rights." "I'd say presumptuous is an understatement." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Welcome to what will soon be your ranch." Something flickered in his eyes, amusement, approval. She couldn't tell, and that irritated her more than his presence. The wedding ceremony 3 days later was a sparse affair. The local preacher, her father, Kane, herself, and Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring spread as witness. No flowers, no celebration, just legal words that bound her to a man she barely knew. When Kane kissed her at the ceremony's end, it was brief and respectful, but she caught something in his expression, a depth that suggested layers she hadn't begun to uncover. That first week of marriage passed in careful politeness and unspoken boundaries. Kane took the guest room without discussion, spent his days writing the property lines, and his evenings reading by lamplight. Eleonora found herself watching him more than she cared to admit, trying to reconcile the man she'd expected with the one sharing her home. He was nothing like the soft Easterner she'd imagined. His hands bore calluses. He knew his way around horses, and she'd caught him fixing the water pump with a competence that spoke of genuine experience. Yet there was something calculated about him, as if every word and action served a larger purpose she couldn't see. "You're not what I expected," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Kane looked up from the letter he'd been reading, folding it carefully before responding. "What did you expect? Someone who saw this place as just another acquisition. Someone who'd never worked a day with his hands." He held up his hands, showing the calluses and old scars. "I've worked plenty of days with these, just not always on ranches." "What kind of work?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "The kind that teaches you to read people, to plan ahead, and to never show all your cards at once." Before she could ask what that meant, the sound of approaching riders cut through the evening air. 3 men emerged from the twilight, their faces hard and unfriendly. The leader, a man with silver hair and cold eyes, dismounted with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. "Sterling," the man called out. "We need to talk." Kane rose slowly, and Eleonora noticed his hand move almost imperceptibly toward his hip, where she now realized he wore a gun concealed beneath his jacket. "Doolan," Kane replied, his voice carefully neutral. "This is my wife, Eleonora. Eleonora, meet Cormac Doolan. He's an associate of my father's." The way he said associate made Eleonora's skin crawl. Doolan's smile was all teeth and no warmth as he touched his hat brim. "Mrs. Sterling, congratulations on your marriage. I hope it's everything you hoped for." "What do you want, Doolan?" Kane's voice had gone flat, dangerous. "Just to discuss business. The railroad business we talked about. Time's running short and we need to finalize our arrangements." Eleonora felt ice form in her stomach. "Railroad business? What arrangements?" "Not here," Kane said. "Not in front of my wife." Doolan's laugh was ugly. "Oh, I think she should hear this. After all, it concerns her land. See, Mrs. Sterling, your new husband here has been very helpful in our little enterprise. The new railroad route's going to make this land very valuable, and we've been planning to ensure we're positioned to benefit from that development." "That's enough," Kane warned, but Doolan continued. "The plan was simple. Your husband marries you, consolidates the land rights, and then, well, let's just say newly married couples can be careless around dangerous ranch work. Accidents happen." The words hit Eleonora like a physical blow. She turned to stare at Kane, seeing the truth in his face, not guilt but something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You bastard," she whispered, backing toward the house. "Eleonora, wait." "No," she spun around, fury and betrayal burning through her. "This was all planned. The marriage, everything. You're going to kill me for the land." "Actually," Kane said, his voice suddenly calm and carrying a note of steel she'd never heard before, "that was never the plan. At least, not my plan." Doolan's expression shifted from smug to confused. "What are you talking about, Sterling?" Kane smiled, and it was nothing like the warm expression she'd seen before. This was the smile of a predator who'd been waiting for exactly the right moment. "I'm talking about the fact that you've been played, Doolan. All of you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. "You see, I've been playing a longer game than any of you realized." "Kane," Doolan's voice carried a warning now. "Don't do anything stupid." "Stupid?" Kane laughed, unfolding the paper. "Stupid would have been going along with your plan to murder my wife and steal her land based on false information." He held up the paper, a map, Eleonora realized. "This is the real railroad survey map, Doolan. The one you never saw because you were too busy believing the false information I've been feeding you for months." Doolan's face went white. "That's impossible. The railroad isn't coming through here," Kane continued, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man revealing his masterpiece. "It's going 20 miles north through the Morrison Valley. This land, it's exactly what it appears to be, a struggling ranch with good water rights and decent grazing. Worth saving, worth fighting for, but not worth killing innocent people over." "You're lying." One of Doolan's men snarled, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Am I?" Kane pulled out another document. Territorial Marshal's office tends to be very interested in conspiracy to commit murder, especially when they have detailed written evidence of the entire plot. The silence that followed was broken only by the evening wind through the cottonwoods. Eleonora stared at her husband, really looked at him for the first time, and saw not the man she'd thought she married, but someone far more complex and dangerous. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who believes in justice," Kane replied, never taking his eyes off Doolan. Someone who spent the last year infiltrating your father's operation, Dulan, gathering evidence and making sure innocent people didn't die for your greed. Dulan's hand moved toward his gun, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats stopped him cold. 6 territorial marshals emerged from the gathering darkness, rifles ready. Cormac Dulan, the lead marshal, called out, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted land fraud." As the marshals took Dulan and his men into custody, Eleonora sank onto the porch steps, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed about her marriage, about Cain, about the last weeks, all of it had been part of something larger and more complex than she could have imagined. Cain dismissed the marshals with quiet efficiency, then returned to where she sat. He lowered himself onto the step beside her, maintaining careful distance. "I suppose you have questions," he said. "A few thousand," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Starting with who you really are." "My name really is Cain Sterling. I really am from back east, Boston, actually. But I'm not a businessman, at least not the kind you thought. I work for people who hire me to solve problems that regular law enforcement can't handle, problems like Dulan. And the marriage." Cain was quiet for a long moment. "That wasn't part of the original plan. I was supposed to get close to your family, gather evidence about Dulan's scheme and stop it. But your father was desperate, Dulan was pressing hard, and..." He paused. "And I realized the only way to protect you and get the evidence I needed was to become part of the family." Eleonora absorbed this, trying to reconcile everything she'd experienced with this new information. "So our marriage is just a business arrangement after all." "It was," Cain said carefully. "But somewhere along the way it became something else, at least for me." She turned to study his profile in the gathering darkness. The careful mask he'd maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and honest. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you. The immediate danger is over, but legally we're married. I won't hold you to vows made under false pretenses, but..." He looked at her directly. "I'd like the chance to court my own wife properly if she'll have me." Despite everything, the deception, the danger, the revelation that her entire world had been built on lies, Eleonora found herself smiling. "I suppose that would be the respectable thing to do," she said. 6 months later, Eleonora Sterling stood on the same porch where her world had been turned upside down, watching her husband direct the construction of the new railroad station. Not the station Dulan had planned to profit from, but one they were building together as part of a freight and supply depot serving the ranches in the valley. The original ranch house had been expanded, its rooms filled with the warmth of a real home rather than the careful politeness of strangers sharing space. Cain had been true to his word about courting her properly, bringing her wildflowers, asking permission for kisses, sharing stories of his past and dreams for their future. She'd learned that behind his careful facades lay a man of deep principles and unexpected tenderness. He'd saved every penny of the reward money from Dulan's capture, using it to expand the ranch and secure their future. More importantly, he'd kept every promise he'd made to her, including the most important one, to never lie to her again. The foundation set, Cain called out as he approached the porch, dust coating his work clothes. "Should have the frame up by next week." "Good," Eleonora replied, moving to meet him at the steps. "Mrs. Henderson says 3 more families are interested in settling in the valley once the depot's operational." Cain smiled, the real smile she'd come to treasure, and pulled her into his arms. "Sounds like our gamble's paying off." Our gamble, betting on each other, he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Turns out partnership is worth more than all of Doolan's schemes put together. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in the same shades of copper and gold that had witnessed their first real conversation, Eleonora reflected on the strange turns life could take. She'd been forced into a marriage she'd resented, only to discover it was exactly what she'd needed, not just to save the ranch, but to find the partner she'd never known she was looking for. Sometimes the longest games produced the most surprising winners.